How's it going, everyone? This is a unexpected live stream, a breaking news debrief, if you like. There was a set of strikes that happened earlier tonight, about an hour and a half ago, and news is still pretty sketchy. And of course, I'm not going to have all the information, but essentially, there has been a renewed flare-up between the United States and Iran over the Strait of Hormuz, over a lack of progress in peace talks, which is simply inevitable. As I've said from the very beginning of this conflict, these two were always destined to come to blows. After the intensity of the initial aerial campaign by the Israelis and Americans over March, we entered this new phase where we're basically seeing flashpoints. We're seeing flare-ups, as I call them, moments where there is a heightened sense of tension, aggression, exchange of fire, perhaps war of words more than just simply words. But in essence, this is a pretty bad one. Another example was on Monday when the United States, when Trump announced Project Freedom, this whole idea that America is somehow going to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz, that somehow they're going to resolve the challenge that has been a challenge for them for the best part of a month now. And as you know, if you're a regular on the channel, I'm increasingly unrestrained in my criticism of Trump. I have tried to apply a degree of sane washing, as one speaker that we had on, one guest had on a few weeks ago now, said, you got to try and stop sane washing. And many of you in the comments effectively say that as well. But in essence, yeah, this is the ramifications of that. Now, basically what happened, and I'll give you the American perspective first. So a short while ago, the United States CENTCOM said that American forces intercepted, quote, unprovoked Iranian attacks and responded with self-defense strikes as US Navy guided missile destroyers. I'll bring up the thing actually so that you can see it whilst I read from it as well. I'm going to share from Al Jazeera. It's just one of the more updated live streams that I could find. But don't worry, it's not meant to sort of say that I'm politically orientated any one way or another. But anyway, so yeah, the United States CENTCOM said that American forces intercepted, quote, unprovoked Iranian attacks and responded with self-defense strikes. So the US Navy guided missile destroyers transited the Strait of Hormuz towards the Gulf of Oman on May 7th. So according to this statement, the Iranian forces launched a coordinated assault involving multiple missiles, drones, and small boats, whilst the US Truxtun, or DDJ, US Rafael, and USS Mason were navigating the international sea passage. Officials confirmed that, quote, no US assets were struck during this engagement. And in response to, quote, aggression, the US CENTCOM said it eliminated inbound threats and targeted military facilities responsible for attacking forces. Now, I find the word aggression quite interesting here because that's the word that we often see the anti-American entities saying. The Russians will often say that the Ukrainian aggression or Western aggression, and the Iranians often use that sort of phrasing when they're talking about American and Israeli airstrikes, which in some ways, perhaps you could say it is. But the Americans are sort of trying to adopt the same rhetorical approach, the same sort of wording, framing to legitimize their response. Now, it's not entirely clear how accurate that is, but basically it doesn't seem actually like they're finished. The CENTCOM has released this information, but there are ongoing explosions as I speak to you right now. I'm just looking at my X feed here, and there is a fair amount of claims of explosions happening in southern Iran. So the Americans perhaps aren't finished with the situation. Now, when we take a step back and look at this in the broader sphere of things, obviously this, I think, has a lot of symbolism of earlier on in the week, and more broadly just how these two engage one another. Simply speaking, that neither side is ever going to provide full information, but neither side is equally willing to just accept the situation. And so what we're having now is a flare up going up the escalation ladder, whilst also trying to push diplomacy. About 4 or 5 hours ago, the Trump administration had been confirming that peace talks had gone well. I mean, take it at face value, but the Trump administration, Trump himself had said that the talks were looking somewhat positive. I don't really know what to make of that, how much of that is just fog of war. But in essence, these two are basically trying to say, look, we are not going to back down. It is a war of existential survival versus grandiose narcissism / ego. I think we know which is which, but in this is largely what it comes down to for me. And I had a good rant at someone earlier, because they simply tried to deny that this is nothing to do with Trump's epic strategic failure and lack of strategic depth. So in my mind, these two are just doing what is inevitable, really, where there is a miscommunication between one of them, or one of them gets frustrated. They think that the other side is trying to provoke, and so they launch something preemptively, and then the other side actually responds because it wasn't intended. In this case, I think it's that the Iranians thought the Americans were trying to traverse the Strait of Hormuz, or that there was an American vessel that was being provocative, and so they decided to launch missiles, drones, whatever, utilize assets to respond. And in this case, the Americans, maybe they weren't doing anything, maybe they were, have reacted in kind by retaliating. So it's just a never-ending spiral of strategic ambiguity, miscommunication, miscalculation. But it can go a whole lot worse, because these two don't have neither side has the capacity to back down. So what we've also seen, this was 55 minutes ago. Yeah, so that was half an hour ago. Yeah, so the latest explosion was reported in Iran's Hormuzgan province. That's the other critical thing. So a lot of the information that first came out was actually from Iran's state news agencies, or specifically Iran's Mehr news agency. So there was initially quite a lot of, disagreement over whether this was even occurring. What's interesting, and as I think this reporter from Al Jazeera puts it, this is tit for tat, right? It's a quintessential example of how these two engage one another historically. They're not going to push the boat out too far, but they're going to push just enough so that they feel that they've done enough to deter, to claim a win, to suggest that they came out on top of this. But of course, it's coming at the same time as this diplomacy that I mentioned before. Now, in my opinion, that's because this is how Trump seems to approach these sorts of situations, a bit of the carrot and the stick sort of analogy, I guess, that if you offer the idea of a drawdown or of a clarification, de-escalation, but at the same time you utilize military coercion, or simply what's known as coercive diplomacy. Now, in some cases that can work. We've seen that work with lesser stated countries, but to be honest with you, I don't think that's really the case in this instance. I think it's just for Iran, it doesn't work. This is not a country that simply behaves like this. It is a country that is very well versed with how to handle the Americans. Their entire business model, if you like, or governance model, is based on surviving the sort of forced capitulation or toppling of their system. And as always, this isn't an endorsement of the Islamic Republic. I don't think anyone of a reasonable mind actually wants to see them remain in power. But this is a fundamental screw up by the Trump administration. As I said on an X space earlier, this is in many ways Trump's version of the Soviet Afghanistan. It's not, I think, the American Afghanistan, because some objectives were actually achieved in that, whilst in the Soviet version of Afghanistan, literally nothing was achieved. They didn't get anywhere. Or it's America's Vietnam. It's Trump's version of Vietnam in Iran, because they haven't achieved anything. They have destroyed less than a third of Iran's military assets, according to the latest intelligence reports. And all it's done is push the cost of oil, the hell of amount of insider trading that the Trump administration is doing. I think it's pretty clear that that's happening. Somehow I was allowed into the United States a couple of weeks ago, despite having said that, which I thought they would check, social media use, and the fact that I've said that would be a no-go for, just almost broke my microphone, a no-go for going into the US. But I do think that it's a pretty clear reality that's been happening. Anyway, bottom line is this is inevitable. What we're seeing now is inevitable. As one professor has called it, it's, the escalation trap. Others call it the escalation cycle. But these two, as long as we are stuck in this limbo where the United States is not willing to, or more specifically Trump, I keep making this point because I think it matters, but it's simply that this isn't even about the United States versus Iran. It's Trump versus Iran, because he is so personally involved in it that he can't back down now, even though his own administration are trying to provide clarification, even though his own administration are trying to walk back or play down some of the things he says. Yeah. So, yeah, some of you saying this has just happened. Yes, it has just happened. So let me see if I can find a summary for you guys. But simply what happened was the Americans responded, and some people state are still responding, that the US military struck Iran's Qeshm port and Bandar Abbas about an hour ago. The strike was on one of Iran's oil ports after Iran fired several ballistic missiles. Now, the exchange of blows between the US and Iran continued for not more than about 10, 15 minutes. That's the estimation of Israeli intelligence. But essentially, what the US claims happened is that the US Navy destroyers that were transiting the Hormuz Strait were attacked by swarms of a mixture of gunboats or fast boats, who engaged them with 5-inch main gun entities, and then small caliber fire. That was US officials to CBS about 42 minutes ago. And that's what prompted the United States to respond by targeting specific military bases, facilities across the country. As I say, I'll read the whole thing, but basically they intercepted, the crux of it is that they intercepted an unprovoked Iranian attack and responded with self-defense strikes as the US guided missile destroyers transited the Strait of Hormuz. So you could argue that that's an unnecessary provocation or move by the US to do that. But they're going to say that this is their right to do that. They are blockading the Iranians, and therefore they will not be deterred. The Iranians launched this mixture of missiles, drones, small gunboats, which I think is interesting because it demonstrates that the Iranians clearly have a sufficient amount of stockpiles of arsenals of both drones, let alone missiles, as well as small boats. The small boats, I think, is particularly noteworthy because it demonstrates that they still have, maybe you don't want to call it a navy, but they have a functioning maritime operation of some form, and that's not enough for them to have destroyed. The Americans stated early on that they had destroyed a lot of naval assets of the IRGC, but clearly not enough. And the Iranians have enough of these small sort of dinghies or whatever, Zeppelin kind of, but not Zeppelins, whatever the small boats are, to pester, to be a pain. Now, as of about 20 minutes ago, Iran has been saying the IGC has released a statement that the US has violated the ceasefire. The IGC said the US Army attacked against Iran's oil tanker near the port of Jask. So the Iranian Navy responded with, quote, intensive explosive warheads. So I'm giving you the CENTCOM perspective, America's claims, and this is the Iranians, the IGC. So intense explosive warheads and, quote, intelligence services indicating significant damage to the American enemy, and 3 enemies invading ships quickly fled the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, if you want my honest opinion, this is complete horse shit from both of them. I mean, the Americans use slightly less loaded language. The important thing to note at the end of the CENTCOM, let me bring up the screen again so you can see it. But what the important bit, I think, is this bit. Does not seek escalation. So they're trying to clarify that this is not an escalation in their eyes. And more specifically, there was a statement from one US official, I think to NBC News, which basically said that this was not a return to war. So again, like we saw on Monday, both sides, or specifically the Americans in this case, are very adamantly trying to ensure, they're trying to avoid any sense that this is a return to conflict. They're doing everything they can to telegraph, we may have seen some military engagement, some military activity, but this isn't a return. We're not seeking to go back to war. Okay. The Iranians aren't saying that. I mean, they haven't clarified yet. They've said that they've violated the ceasefire, but again, they're using phrasing like invading ships, retreat, loaded language to say that they are defending their sovereignty, they're defending themselves, and the aggressor, that is the American imperial power, is being pushed away. Classic framing towards their population, obviously, but all it demonstrates to me is just how much neither of these two really want to go back to all-out conflict, regardless of what is being said by social media or commentators. I think it's pretty clear that these two are willing to sort of, well, have a spat, have a skirmish. This is a skirmish. That's one phrasing that someone used, and I suppose in this sense it is a skirmish. But yeah, that's yeah. I mean, this is a good actual update here. So it's not the first attack. There has been the Monday incident. There have been a few incidences during this time where the Americans and the Iranians have come close to proper exchanges again. But because of the nature, I think, of the Strait of Hormuz, because of what it represents, it doesn't have the same rapidity. There's not the same intensity that occurs over, let me see here. Yeah, so you've got the Strait of Hormuz tracker, which is quite interesting. So switch to share this tab instead. Yeah, so this is a website that's actually been really interesting to follow if you're particularly interested in the Strait of Hormuz. But hormuzstraitmonitor.com essentially is showing you just how much the levels have dropped. Now, I don't know if it's taken into account what we've seen in the past hour and a bit, but essentially you can see just what it's done to pricing since pricing of oil. I mean, Christ, look at that. But yeah, essentially the Strait of Hormuz is a slow burner. It's not somewhere that has the same scale and intensity that aerial campaigns do. And a blockade is not it's not an exciting military maneuver. It's largely static, to be honest with you. It's more when you get these occasional miscommunications or deliberate misdirection, deliberate fog of war. At the end of the day, one of these could have done it as a way to try to test the other's resolve as the peace talks are getting further, or as some degree of diplomacy is being claimed to being made. Earlier on in April, when we saw, as the BBC segment I just showed earlier on in April, when there was another flare-up, coincidentally that timed quite conveniently with when there was progress being claimed towards a peace deal, early to mid-April, say sort of around the exact date, like 7th of May, 10th of 7th of April, 10th of April sort of range, the first 10 days of the month, there was suggestion of peace actually, being made when the Pakistani peace talks were really in full swing, and then suddenly there was a major flare up. So it does seem quite coincidental that these things happen. It's one side or the other testing the resolve of their opponent to see just how much they're committed to it, and so on. It depends quite a lot. Larry says the UAE, Israel, US will attack on May 7th. Well, attacking what said? Well, the US attacked in response to the Iranians. That's what they're claiming. So, I mean, I asked Larry if he had time to come on. Unfortunately, I didn't think he was available. But essentially, yeah, we're in this dance. To quote another guest I had on a couple of days ago, we're in this dance where both sides are essentially making these calculated assessments, these risk calculations of whether they can launch an attack, whether they can get away with pushing the boundaries. Now, as I say, I personally think that the United States would be within its best interests of just trying to find a diplomatic solution to this. The Iranians have a lot more to fight on for this. There's a lot more driving the Iranians in all of this than there is Trump. And I think for that reason, the Iranians are not going to back down. But of course, it's not a clear-cut situation, as in they can go on indefinitely. The Iranian economy is pretty shot, and there's very little appetite, I think, amongst the Iranian people to really see it continuing. But at the same time, they don't have much choice. And the IRGC are fully in control of the situation. So I think that I think we're going to be stuck in this merry-go-round for a while further. Yeah, we do. The CENTCOM and Ollie, to your question, yeah. So there is enough evidence. I mean, CENTCOM has said it. The Iranians have said it. I don't see why both sides would be stating otherwise. It's also, I think, worth thinking that that at the end of the day, this is all happening as Trump's meeting with President Xi Jinping is approaching, and one has to wonder, why would the United States want to be in a sustained sense of conflict with the Iranians when he wants to go there to try to sort of win the Chinese over, but like have a constructive conversation with the Chinese. So to me, it seems rather amiss that they aren't trying to push for a peace deal or a more comprehensive agreement more broadly. But equally interesting is that the Chinese haven't really been here at all. They haven't been anywhere in this situation, have they? They've been very muted. Of course, they're in a better position than a lot of people claim, but they're not immune. Most estimations suggest that they've got about 6 months worth of reserves, I think, before the events that we're seeing now really do eat away even more. So in my opinion, there are other factors that are really, I think, driving the considerations of the Trump administration. Right, let me see what else there's another really good live map as well of the Strait of Hormuz, which I think I can find. Live traffic map. So there's this one as well, which is quite interesting if you guys like watching the live map. So you can see here, actually, let me share this one. It's got a lot of ads on it. So you can see the buildup of maritime vessels around these areas, and it gives you their exact designation, their name, and also the country affiliation. Now, I think what's interesting was some of the points that I was having with a guest earlier today, a maritime expert, and he was basically explaining the complexities of the Strait of Hormuz as a maritime waterway, because some people have incorrectly claimed that the Hormuz Strait is Iranian and Omani. And whilst it is largely within their territorial waters, under the international law of the sea, the Charter, the UN, which Iran is a signatory to, so is Oman, so is the US, and I think mostly, this is treated in a very unique way. So what's happening with the Strait of Hormuz now does obviously violate a lot of international law, maritime law. Not that that really matters necessarily, because the Americans are imposing an unlawful maritime blockade, but essentially this is a natural waterway, right? It's not the same as the Suez Canal or Panama, which is artificial. But the other thing, obviously, other people worry about is the Bab el-Mandeb, this area, which, of course, if the Houthis wanted to get back involved, they may well be able to put pressure on that. Interestingly, about 6 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, a month ago, something like that, the Houthis suddenly did get involved. They launched a couple of rockets towards the Israelis, and nothing came of it. And there was a lot of energy and concern that demonstrated that the Houthis were being quote unquote activated, that the IRGC, that the Iranians were activating the Houthis. But since then, nothing has happened. And the prospect of sort of the Horn of Africa, the Greater Horn of Africa, and sort of this area would be the Gulf of Aden, would be sort of closed off as well. If that happened, then you really would see an absolute rocket of prices for not just oil or raw energy, but also many more commodities, many more commercial goods, and it would make what we're experiencing now look like a walk in the park. So, and that's the other thing that my guest from earlier today, Alex, was actually mentioning, which is I didn't realize just how important helium is through this area. Of course, we've got oil, that's the main focus, but you also have LNG gas, which Qatar quickly shut off. And so that's been a huge setback for everyone. But it's also things like helium and a couple of other raw commodities that go through the Strait of Hormuz, which a lot of people seem to overlook, but which are fundamentally fundamental rather for the overall needs of so many countries. And frustratingly, what I hear from a lot of people who are still so pro-Trump or believe that this is a sort of a strategic plan is that it can somehow, the United States is insulated from all of this. Even if the US has a decent provision of energy or energy security, it doesn't have every good in the world, every material. And so even if it's okay because of the very rawest form of like oil and gas, other goods that it needs to import, which are dependent on the usage of oil or whatever in their creation, it means they're still going to be affected. The sort of down the value chain or whatever, the supply chain, people seem to forget that it requires the raw components to create the other goods. So yeah, the short-sightedness I find of some people in their sort of unrestrained belief that Trump has a plan and it's all good is very scary. But let's zoom out here. I mean, look at this. You just look at the extent to which traffic has been screwed over in this area around Bandar. So Bandar was one of the areas struck. This area around southern area of Iran was predominantly the focal point, according to the Iranian media. That's at least what they're saying. Now let me just check here as well. So we've got, yeah, so we've heard there were explosions also apparently occurring near the city of Sirik. So Sirik is, let's see if I can see Sirik. Well, I mean, I'm not an expert of, I really wish I could visit. I actually had a really interesting conversation with an Uber driver just yesterday when I was coming back from where I've been traveling recently, and they were talking, and they were Iranian, and they were telling me about just sort of what some of the land around southern Iran is, which is where they were from. They were from a coastal town, Chabahar, down here. They were from this area, And they were explaining to me just how complicated this area also is with Pakistan and the different independence or separatist groups that exist around there as well. So it's pretty interesting. Yeah, that's Sal, the shipping guy. Yeah, no, Salma Merciliago and I were talking as well. We were meant to get him on a few days back actually, but he was pretty well. He's in high demand, as I'm sure you can imagine. Okay. So Trump has now said that the strikes on Iran are just a love tap. The ceasefire is going. It's in effect. Explain that to me. Well, I mean, I don't actually need it, but yeah, so this is what we know about the latest escalation. That's it. This is a good summary. Let me bring this here. So what we know about the latest escalation, those of you just joining. So the US targeted an Iranian oil tanker moving from the Iranian coastal waters near Jask towards the Strait of Hormuz, as well as another Iranian vessel near the UAE's Fujairah port. The spokesman accused the US of carrying out strikes on civilian areas in Bandar Kamir, Surg, and Qasem Island in southern Iran with the cooperation of some other regional countries. I'm going to hazard a guess and say that that's the UAE. Indeed, there was some coverage on X earlier from some accounts, some of the OSINT accounts, doing some assessment of some of the flight paths, some of the materials, or just sort of where and how it had been carried out, with some falling on the sort of reasonable assessment that it was the UAE. And considering what we've seen in the past 48 hours, 24 hours with the UAE and the Iranians as well, I think that's a reasonable grounds too. To me, the UAE is going to be in a tricky situation, not because they can't handle it, but because they are already in a difficult situation with what impact it's having on the economy. But what I do think a lot of people have underestimated is the capacity for the Emiratis to respond. They clearly have a lot more of a capable defensive capacity than people assumed, and I think that that's reflected in just how many overseas conflicts that they've been involved with, supplying arms, supplying non-state actors, proxy groups. Just look at Sudan. The Emiratis have been incredibly active in the provision of drones and other certain assets to the RSF, or the Rapid Support Forces. On the one hand, they've also been active in, of course, Yemen, and I think this is only going to grow as their rift with the Saudis increases. Now, for those of you interested, I made a video yesterday discussing what the UAE's departure from OPEC means, really, because it's a lot more than just oil. It's about the changing nature of the whole Gulf and therefore the Middle East. And not because the Gulf is the entirety of the Middle East, but because it's obviously such an important cornerstone for a lot of regional dynamics, energy, and the UAE feels confident enough to diversify away from from oil only. They actually joined, I didn't realize this, but they actually joined OPEC before they were a state, before they were a recognized nation state. And I think that that's fascinating because it shows you that they were trying to think longer term about how to ensure the preservation of the state as it is, without just being dependent on oil. And that's why you've seen a bit of a shift, a rift, a divergence between them and the Saudis, because the Saudis they benefit from the price caps, the price levels, the price controls on oil through OPEC, whilst the UAE does not. And over time, this rift has become stronger. It's become more evident, not just because of the war now, but lingering issues over Yemen, over the war in Ukraine, over just the regional power dynamics, the UAE's willingness to recognize Israel, the Abraham Accords, all these sorts of individual geopolitical, geostrategic, geoeconomic factors playing into it. And their decision to leave OPEC is huge, because it shows that the GCC, or specifically OPEC, is losing clout. It's losing its capacity to be seen perhaps as relevant in this international system as it used to be. It certainly, the UAE sees themselves as not just a petro state. They see themselves as a financial hub, cryptos obviously, but also as a middle power, as a diplomatic player. They've been very active in trying to facilitate dialogue between other parties across the world. And as I made in a video about 6 months ago now, there is a growing shift between the let me just close that. There's a growing shift. You've got two blocks emerging. You've got the Emiratis, the Israelis, and the Indians, if you want to extend the broader Middle East for a moment, and the Turks, the Pakistanis, and the Saudis. These groups, now Egypt is also in there in a certain capacity, but basically these two blocks, these two alliances, if you like, are vying for sort of regional dominance. And certainly the Saudis have been pushing for a greater sort of overall dominance across the Gulf, being the biggest player, and therefore leveraging their weight through the GCC or OPEC, which alienated or made the Emiratis resentful to a certain extent, and they've decided to bite the bullet and break away. They're not the first to do that, but they are the third. They were the third largest, and so to do so is a significant blow to OPEC. And one wonders just how much capacity that alliance has to last. Moreover, it's not really been very relevant. A lot of the Middle Eastern alliance systems, like the Arab League as well, haven't really been very useful in this conflict over the past 2-3 months. And so what we're beginning to see is perhaps a shift away. I'm getting really nerdy now, but we're shifting away from the broader, bigger multilateral alliances to more nimble, smaller variants like minilateral groups. So one example is the I2U2. This is a weird concoction. The Emiratis are in it, the US is in it, the Indians in it, and so is Israel. And so it seems to me like the Emiratis are putting more and more of their eggs in the US basket, even though they do host Vladimir Putin and other anti or Western critical voices on a regular basis. A couple of years ago, when they hosted Putin, they laid out literally the red carpet. It was in a limo. It was all very grand and pomp and circumstance. So I think it's going to be very interesting to watch what the Emiratis do if this war continues, and if it goes back to more of a hot war than simply this sort of fragile ceasefire. Then would the UAE actually increase the amount that they act? What's more is interesting is that the Project Freedom was discontinued because the Saudis and Kuwaitis, specifically, don't know why, the Kuwaitis suddenly felt so propelled to do this, but they blocked the Americans from using their bases, which was one of the reasons that Project Freedom was actually called off in the middle of the week. Then they discontinued that. Earlier today, it was announced around, I think, lunchtime, 2 o'clock UK time, that the Saudis had decided to give the Americans the green light to conduct Operation Freedom. Maybe this is them doing so. At the end of the day, if we bring it back to the more recent developments this evening, I think it's pretty clear that both sides are going to claim that they were acting within their right to do so. The Americans claiming that they were doing simply what they've warned that they would, which is prevent any ship from leaving or engage any ship that was claimed that could be considered associated with the Iranians. And the Iranians will say that the Americans were provocative and targeted their ships, and that's what caused them to act in defense. And then the Americans will claim, well, because they attacked us, actually we responded. So it's my word against yours. I attacked you first, and then we were defending ourselves. No, you attacked us first, and we retaliated to you. So, I mean, in my opinion, I think that the American, well, this whole situation is completely stupid and unnecessary. The Americans perhaps were acting according to their commitments, to what they stated, but ultimately this wasn't necessary. Now the Iranians shooting at launching missiles targeting the naval vessels. Well, it's not a wise move, perhaps, but the Iranians did warn the Americans not to do that. I mean, at the end of the day, this whole conflict, this whole situation is absolutely absurd to me, to be honest. And the fact that Trump just calls it a love tap shows that he doesn't really care. He doesn't really care. And regardless of what he's saying about the, idea of peace talks, I almost feel like the guy's bipolar, to be honest with you. It's like sort of, you've got a day Trump where he's saying sort of standard comments, perhaps slightly dumb or a bit dim or a bit questionable, but then overnight it's like Jekyll and Hyde, and this alter ego of Trump comes out at night, like he's had a drink and he's just like, I'll just be much more cavalier and flippant with my comments. But yeah, let me read you what was said. So the Iranians say, as I say, that was bad English. The Iranians state that the US targeted this Iranian oil tanker. Now, they don't really explain, I think that's a critical point, but they don't really explain what they mean by the Americans targeted an Iranian oil tanker. They targeted them with missiles, or they simply tried to impound them. That's not clear from the Iranian statement. They said that the US carried out airstrikes on the civilian areas, or, well, the Americans say they were military facilities on southern parts of Iran. But that was already in response to the Iranians targeting the US Navy. So I think the main point here is that the Iranians claim that the Americans are targeting them, but targeting is a very opaque word unless it's clear what they were doing. And I think the Iranians would use that as a justification to say that they just were responding to, proportionately. I've emphasized from the beginning that Iranians act under international law. They act under the idea of proportionality, or how they try to frame their response is when they provide statements and clarifications, or they go to the UN or something, is they always put it in a framing of two principles of international law: proportionality and precaution. Proportionality meaning that you act in an equal level to what your opponent has done. Precaution being that you act preemptively because you believe that an attack is imminent. This is an approach that the IDF, the Israelis, often like to utilize, which is simply stating that they acted preemptively. They preemptively struck Hezbollah. They preemptively struck the Houthis or Gaza because they thought that an attack, a strike, a threat to northern civilian spaces in Israel, for example, were at risk. Those are the sorts of framings, and the Iranians try to leverage that too, because if they frame it from the guise of international law, then it makes them look like they are still a responsible actor, that they're behaving under the guise of international principles, and it's the United States which is the aggressor, the provocateur, the illegal one, the one acting illegally. So after this statement, let's just bring it back. So the statement was issued shortly after sustained air fire was heard in western Tehran following two loud blasts. That's according to Iran's official IRNA news agency. So that, along with the Mertz networks, were the two main ones that were covering the initial events. The IRNA reported that anti-aircraft fire continued for several minutes in areas near Tehran's District 22 and Ahmadabad Mostofi. in the western part of the capital. Can't say that I know Tehran that well, unfortunately. I'd love to visit sometimes, as I say. And then from the Iranian, the American perspective, CENTCOM said it had eliminated, quote, inbound threats and targeted Iranian military facilities responsible for attacking US forces, including missile and drone launch sites, command and control locations, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance nodes. That's quite a lot for the Americans to have targeted within sort of 20, 25 minutes. And one wonders why they haven't done, if they knew about all those locations, why didn't they take them out in the March rounds of bombing? It's a very fleshed out set of claims from CENTCOM, even though, and also they produced this statement as the strikes were still ongoing, which I find a little bit confusing. Some sort of almost like it wasn't, I don't know, unconvinced fully on the CENTCOM's claim of events. Not that I believe the Iranians either. As I say, I think this is a degree of exaggeration, embellishment from both sides, alongside simplification. Simplification of some facts, embellishment of others. Let's put it that way. Okay, so we've got a bit more information from Trump here. Trump has said 3 destroyers transited. Hang on, let me bring this up if you want to read it as well. Who doesn't love reading Trump's Truth Socials, right? Let's see here. Aha. We have it. This came out just over 20 minutes ago. How do I really need to get better. I need someone to help me run these what do you call it? Streams. Right, yeah. So Trump has put this, that 3 world-class American destroyers just transited very successfully out of the Strait of Hormuz under fire. There was no damage done to the 3 destroyers. Why does he capitalize destroyers? I find his tweets very confusing. He randomly... Okay, so it's anything to do with the US is capitalized. They were completely destroyed along with numerous small boats, which are being used to take the place of their fully decapitated navy. These boats went to the bottom of the sea. Oh, okay, it's not related to America, because I saw sort of country, so I guess that was America country, and then I saw destroyers, and because they're American destroyers, so they're capitalized. But these boats went to the bottom of the sea, capitalized, quickly and efficiently. Missiles were shot at our destroyers and were easily knocked down. Likewise, drones came and were incinerated while in the air. He's a fantastic storyteller, isn't he? They dropped ever so beautifully down to the ocean, very much like a butterfly dropping to its... Wow, this is really articulate. Really poetic. A normal country would have allowed these destroyers to pass, but Iran is not a normal country. They are led by lunatics, and they had the chance to use a nuclear weapon. They would do it without question. That they'll never have that opportunity, and just like we knocked them out again today, we'll knock them out a lot harder, violently in the future, if they don't get their deal signed fast. Our 3 destroyers with their wonderful crews will rejoin our naval blockade, which is truly a wall of steel. Does anyone else really want to be a fly on the wall to know what this bloke is doing, what he sounds like, what he looks like when he's writing this stuff? Do you think he actually writes this stuff, or do you think that he has someone dictating, or does he dictate it as someone else writes it? I don't know what to make of this, to be honest, guys. Let's just take stock for that for a minute. Okay, that's enough time dwelling on Trump or his writing. Let's see here. Okay, so this is interesting. So what we have here, I'll show you both.
Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar!
So the thing I have is that I'm not an OSINT. I'm not an OSINT person, so I find it difficult to. Well, I'm not the fastest. As you can tell, like running a podcast or running a video channel like this is a lot of work. So trying to sort of geolocate and verify where those things are is incredibly difficult to do simultaneously. What I would say though is that I'm not convinced by either of those videos, which are obviously state-backed TV news outlet. Personally, I'm just gonna pause that. If we pull that along, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not convinced that that's enough to threaten a US Navy destroyer. Just a hunch. To be honest with you, it looks like something you can buy in, I don't know where most of you are, but Walmart. It just looks like a plastic tube with some sticks under it. I have actually, I'm not a military expert. For those of you, I touch on military matters, but I'm not a military analyst. So if you know what that is, if you can tell me what that is, I like what piece of equipment that is that could be firing that. That doesn't strike me as enough to really pose much of a threat to the US Navy. Just being honest. To be honest with you, who doesn't love a great bit of propaganda though? But I think this all just oh, that's interesting. So citing a report. So this is 8 hours ago, but the Iranians actually struck a Chinese ship. Now, over 2 months ago, the Chinese were putting pressure on the Iranians to keep the Strait of Hormuz open, and the Iranians didn't really listen. So for them now to have had a couple of vessels actually struck, I think that's going to be giving a lot of frustration for Beijing. Not like the end of the day, but certainly I think it's going to be. It's not a missile. It doesn't look like a drone, is it? Drone launcher. Okay, all right. I'll take you guys at face value. I can't say. Am I doubting Iran's reporting? I am. I know. Can you? Yeah, press TV is Iranian state TV. Yes, but yes, I'm doubting Trump's reporting. Look, guys, my position. I think you should be clear by now. We try to diversify opinions on the channel. So, in my opinion, I think I'm gonna call it a day after this. We've been running for a good 55 minutes. What I'm impressed with, and I think you guys should all be impressed with, is my capacity to talk without anyone else joining for over an hour. Which, yeah, I seem to be capable of doing that. But yeah, basically, what we saw, I think, this evening is a reflection of what we saw on Monday. It is a demonstration that these two are willing to push each other occasionally, but not all the way to the point where it leads to all-out war, mainly because neither of them can. What I think is most interesting is that the United States is the one that is telegraphing almost every time immediately. This isn't a return to full war. We are responding to a provocation. They are trying to clarify their position as much as possible. They're trying to minimize the potential for miscommunication, much like the Iranians did back in July. Notice, I think this is a very important comparison point. Notice that the Iranians are not doing what they did in July of last year when they targeted the US air base, the US military base in Qatar in July at the end of the 12-day war, I think it was. The Iranians were incredibly transparent. They're incredibly explicit in stating to the United States, we're going to hit this base, but we're going to hit it at this time, in this way, and in this intensity, giving the Americans enough time to largely evacuate the whole thing, because the Iranians wanted to symbolically strike back, to retaliate against the Americans, Israel, whatever. But they didn't actually want to kill anyone. They didn't actually want to cause harm and escalate further. But they gave enough time to allow the Americans to minimize the damage, or to minimize the actual loss of life. And ultimately there was damage, but there wasn't a need for the Americans to respond. They could let it go. And in this case, though, the Americans are doing this. The very deliberate and frequent repetitive points about ceasefire, about not returning to war, about this not going further than a certain level, is coming from the American side. The Iranians aren't really clarifying that. They're simply just responding to the Americans with strongly worded statements and a commitment to their cause of defending themselves or retaliating against what they see as the American aggression. And I think that that shows you who has, well, one, a greater desire, but also two, perhaps a certain degree of leverage. It's often said, look at what people do as much as what they say. But sometimes the statements are important. There's still a need to read certain parts of the statements, or what's not being said in this case, I guess is a better way to put it. And it's the fact that the Iranians are not saying much about, or not needing to clarify their position or say that we don't want to escalate further, by simply just saying we will retaliate, we are defending ourselves. And I think that that's very revealing in the longer scheme of who has ultimate leverage, or who's willing to stay at this longer. The strategic depth, the strategic patience that the IRGC have, I think, is there more than the political capital of the United States government, or specifically Trump. At the end of the day, I don't think Trump really cares. When he says things like love tap, it shows just a flippancy, an indifference, a sort of, well, whatever kind of attitude, even though I think plenty of people in his government don't have such an attitude. And I will be interested to see tomorrow whether the Americans come out with some kind of statement clarifying their position, or if there's a press conference. You know, Hegseth came out with Joint Chiefs of Staff, Kane, is it, and made it very clear that, you know, this was the day after the flare-ups on Monday. On Tuesday, they came out, and again, they were reiterating that this is not a rejection of the ceasefire. This is not we're not ditching it. We're still looking for a peaceful solution. And that's Hegseth. That's Defense Secretary Hegseth, who's not exactly someone I look to for poetic wording and lovely, you know. Well, he's not Wordsworth. He's not William Shakespeare, put it that way. So I personally think that the Americans are so far in at this point that they just don't know what to do. But yeah, at the end of the day, and also, and I'm making a video on this tomorrow. I've got a couple of interesting videos coming out with some guests. I had a good conversation with General McRyan, who's a very pro-American Western general of the Australian Army. But even he is quite muted in his opinions of this. Anyone, and this is probably one of the last points I'd make, anyone, be them far left, far right, populist, establishment. You know, I'm speaking to Larry, who's very different to some of the more Western orientated guests that we have on the show. All of them are being brought together by Donald Trump, by this single guy, and his capacity to say, yeah, no, let's just do this, let's just do that. And I think it's a remarkably, you have to be honest, it's a remarkable skill to have, to be able to piss off, alienate, antagonize so many different people from so many different walks of life, and be like, yeah, but yeah, he's made a strategic blunder. He's a complete idiot. It's only Trump, I think, could do this. I'm not aware of anyone in the UK. Maybe Boris Johnson, although Boris Johnson has. Forget that. That's too much of a niche comparison. I don't know if those of you will know who I'm talking about, but yeah. All right, guys. Thanks for those of you joining, the hardcore ones that I always see. I'm great to see 80 of you on the Global Gambit channel as well. I slightly bit off more than I can chew by trying to split the channels up, but those of you subscribed there, thanks for joining on the podcast channel. And thanks for all of you supporting the show as always. Appreciate it. Look out for tomorrow. We've got a part one with a very well-known guest. I'm not going to say who. He's a big general in NATO, was. We had a very exciting conversation in person with someone today about the UK, and I'm hoping to do more. So yeah, if you enjoy this sort of stuff, then do use and give the video a thumbs up. Do subscribe if you want. Well, of course you want to. Why wouldn't you want to? And we'll see you all probably tomorrow. What I will try to start doing is having more regular live streams, maybe once or twice a week. Let me know in the comments what days you think would be better. Obviously, it depends on events. I decided to jump on this live stream a bit late, but I was part of another thing as well. But yeah, and if you want more content on Israel, Palestine, or Israel, Lebanon, I haven't covered that as much because I find that covering Israel and everything is such a such a difficulty. But yeah, I can't stop talking. No, I find it difficult, right? It's difficult when you don't have someone to talk with, so you just have to sort of ramble. You have to sort of think on your feet, and especially if someone's talking, you can look stuff up. So I can find graphs, I can find maps, I can make it more visually interesting. But if I'm talking and I'm trying to find something on the internet, then I stop talking, and then you guys are like, why am I watching a stream of some bloke just sitting in silence? So you didn't come for that. So yeah. Anyway, it's a balancing act, but I want to do more live streams, hopefully with more guests. But anyway, guys, 1 hour in. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you tomorrow with a new video, maybe a stream. As I say, drop in the comments if there's particular days that work for you. I'm thinking sort of maybe Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, always depending on live events and stuff. But look out for more live streams with other guests. I've been working on a lot of things on the back end, trying to improve the system so that it's smoother for me, and so that I can host more whilst not worrying about some other things. And we'll see you all tomorrow or over the weekend. Take care.